fan of musicals. I feel it is my duty to keep discovering new musicals on a regular basis, because there are plenty of musicals out there in the world and there will always be plenty more. So this year, I've tried to discover at least one new musical per month, and I hope to do this every year until I get sick and tired of musicals and I have to move on to another genre of music. Since January, I've discovered over 20 musicals, some that are okay, some that I've disliked, but most importantly, some that I've really fallen in love with. So I thought I'd make a video about them! Now, you're probably thinking, shouldn't I be doing this list at the end of the year? I'm impatient. And besides, I don't want to discover any new musicals this year. I've got to save some for next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Now, when I say discover, I mean that I get the soundtrack and I sit down and listen to it while reading along with the score if I can find it. So this means that I have not actually seen any of these musicals on stage, unless they've been made into film, in which case I've seen most of them. My point is, I try to take everything into account when I judge a musical, the story and the characters and all that, but because I just listened to the soundtracks before I saw any of the filmed versions, I do judge the songs more than the story and the characters. I guess that's what comes from being a musical songwriter myself. Now, obviously these are just my opinions that I'm not very good at expressing, and my opinions could likely change on these musicals in a while. But for now, these are the top 10 musicals that I've discovered this year.
World calls for me to follow. A new world waits for my reply.
So even though I'm a musicals fan, I have to shamefully admit that I'm not too familiar with the classics. Rodgers and Hammerstein, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin. Sure, I know of them and I know their most famous songs, but I don't know their musicals inside and out like I do more modern ones. Therefore, I have a few important musical blind spots, and oh my god, if this musical wasn't a big one.
When you see a guy reach for stars in the sky, you can bet that he's doing it for some doll. When you spot
This is one that I don't want to put on this list because this shouldn't have been a musical I discovered this year due to its reputation, but at the same time I had to put it on the list simply because of its reputation. There's a reason why this is one of the best musicals in terms of the music itself. These songs are great. They're upbeat, memorable, and generally old school Broadway, and who can't love that? In a way, this is one of the big musicals that changed everything back in the day, that everyone in musical theatre should study and be inspired by. So if this is such a classic and the music is so good, why didn't it go straight to the top of my list? Well, I guess it's because I don't love it as a whole. I'm not exactly knowledgeable or interested in gambling, so the plot was confusing for me. I guess the characters are okay, and the prominent romantic elements did make me warm to it more. I am drawn to more romantic stories than anything else. If it's got romance in it, I'm bound to be interested, as you shall see in later choices on this list. But hey, you can't deny that it's an extremely well-made classic musical, and I'm not going to argue with that.
World calls for me to follow.
I'm now going to mention an internet reviewer called Paul Dugan and his show Music Movies, where he reviews, well, movie musicals. The show has been a huge advantage in helping me find new musicals. One of them was this. This is Reefer the Genetic Opera, but I've known and liked this musical for a while, so it is not on the list. The creator's latest project, however,
Carnival! Come on, Devil's Carnival! You're the Devils! Carnival! Come on, Devil's Carnival!
When I was doing GCSE drama in secondary school, our last performance was to devise a piece of storytelling in this style of kooky, carnivalesque, weird physical theatre. and I'm so disappointed that this film wasn't released then and that I couldn't see it, because this would have been perfect to show my class. Now, I used to be into a lot of strange, dark, gothic things, mainly Tim Burton films, so I do have a soft spot for The Devil's Carnival. There's some interesting characters in here, as well as some interesting music and an interesting premise. The songs are definitely for an acquired taste. Like Repo, the song's quite hard to listen to because they're so strange and unusual and a bit of a racket. But hey, I like strange from time to time. I'm kind of sad that it's so short, but this is the first in a series and they're making the second one right now, so I hope it'll be as good as the first.
World calls for me to follow.
Another one I found through music movies.
Heading straight for
Oh my god, this musical is madness. It's so over the top and silly and completely played for laughs. This is a pretty dark comedy, and while I don't really like that humour as much anymore, I couldn't help enjoying this. The songs are really catchy, there's a good story, and it's all very, very funny. I think the best part is Alan Cumming, who plays the narrator and shows up in every scene in whatever costume. He needs to be in more things. As I said, it's really over the top and so tongue-in-cheek, and that's where I got most of my laughs from. This is, above all, a satire on the original 1936 film of the same name, and even though it's set in a later period in the musical, it's so great to see the paranoia and purity of the 1950s just played for laughs. Another shout out I want to give is to Kristen Bell, who actually has a very nice singing voice and makes me want to see her in more musicals. I've sort of put this and The Devil's Carnival on the same level, not because I found them both through music movies, but because I like them now, but I would have loved them 4 or 5 years ago.
World calls for me to follow.
I once heard the comparison that musicals are to theatre what blockbusters are to film. Musicals are not works of art, they're just pure entertainment. They're all just big spectacles that pander to the general audience to make lots of money.
Well, there are worse things than sweating by a river on a Sunday. There are worse things than sweating by a river. And you're sweating in a picture that was painted by a genius.
I have to start off by saying that this musical goes up in my books mainly because of this man.
And when the woman that you wanted goes, you can say to yourself, well, I give what I give. But the woman who won't wait for you knows that however you live, there's a part of you always standing by, mapping out the sky.
Mandy Patinkin has such a beautiful voice that it makes me want to write entire musicals for him. I am certainly a fan of Stephen Sondheim, but sometimes he gets on my nerves with how complex his music is. Sometimes I do just want to listen to a catchy song that's easy on the ears. Not saying that Sondheim doesn't write those songs, it's just he doesn't write them very often. Anyway, when I first listened to this musical, it got on my nerves. I didn't think there were any songs that would stay in my head. But it wasn't until I kept listening that I started liking it a little more. There are some songs in here that I love, and what brings the other songs to life are the performances and also the humour. This musical is funny, just in that dry, quick wit that Sondheim's famous for. So it's growing on me. It's not one of my favourite Sondheims, it's not even my favourite on this list, but still early days.
World calls for me to follow.
When I was in college studying musical theatre earlier this year, we had a module called Historical Context of Performance, where we had to write an essay on the historical context of a musical. For research, we had to watch the film version. But to get a good mark, that wasn't enough. So I had to go deep into research on everything to do with it. And for those few weeks, I had quite an obsession with this musical. Not so much now, but sometimes I do find myself getting the song stuck in my head. If I were a rich man, Dooby 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 doom. I must say that I'm more familiar with the film version and its soundtrack than the original Broadway cast, so I shall talk about that version. And to be fair, the film soundtrack is one of the reasons why this musical is on the list, because the arrangements were done by my favourite film composer, John Williams. But even the songs alone are great. I really love the Jewish music style featured in these songs, and the instrumentals for the dance numbers are fantastic. I really like the story too. I've always known about Fiddler on the Roof and that it was set in Russia and there's Jewish people in it, but I never knew the actual story, which is about arranged marriages and family and tradition and prejudice and pogroms and... Yeah, I had to research all that was going on during Tsarist Russia when this took place. I got pretty depressed. But the writers of this musical were aware of this, so they put as much comedy as they could in the first half before the drama and conflict really comes to the surface. And hey, the comedy works. A good balance of comedy and drama that happens to great characters that you care for. It deserves to be called a classic musical. I've only put it lower on this list because, well, I had an obsession with it. I'm not ready to go back to it just yet. And possibly the reason I love it so much is because it was for college and I had to really delve into the history of this musical. So I don't know how much I would love it if I found it some other way.
World calls for me to follow.
God bless music movies.
I put on some makeup, turn on the 8-track. I'm pulling the wig down from the shelf.
What I love about music movies is poor reviews musicals that I've never even heard of before now, even as a fan of musicals. This was one of them. And there's a good reason why I hadn't heard of it until now. The story of Hedwig, the German transgender rock star, is a mature one about finding your identity, mainly your sexual identity, and it does have some interesting themes and symbolism in the film at least. It can get unusual, sometimes uncomfortable, but it is always intriguing. Hedwig may not be the most likeable character, but you can't help but stay invested in her story. But my favourite part about it is, of course, the music, and there is some great music in this. About 4 or 5 years ago, when I still liked dark gothic things, I listened to a lot of rock music, from emo to heavy metal. And with Hedwig and the Angry Inch being centred around the fictional rock band of the same name, there's many types of rock genres here. There's punk rock, there's glam rock, there's soft rock, there's rock and roll, there's even country. Just another thing to add to what's interesting about this musical. Hedwig is a definite one-of-a-kind musical, and it's getting its first Broadway production next year with Neil Patrick Harris in the lead role. What I wouldn't give to get tickets for that!
World calls for me to follow.
Going back to Sondheim.
Phone rings, door chimes, in comes company. No strings, good times, room hums, company.
While discovering new musicals, I'm slowly but surely trying to get through discovering all of Stephen Sondheim's musicals, for he has written many. Sure, there's some I still need to discover in the future, and most of them are his early works. This is the earliest musical of his that I've discovered so far, and I love it so much because it's a musical that I would want to write. It's about one guy and his relationships with his married friends and the women he's simultaneously seeing, and he goes on a discovery of love and what it means to be in love and trying to find the one you love. Romance! So yeah, plenty of plot concerning love and marriage and companionship, but it's not like a big epic spectacle. It's what I like to call a domestic musical, where it's just real life people in real life situations and it's very character based. It's also a concept musical, with scenes that are like slice-of-life vignettes that don't really have to connect to each other, but they all come together in terms of the theme of the story. Concerning Sondheim's songs, they are complex as usual, but they're listenable too. They're very memorable to me. There's some really, really lovely songs in here for the male performers. The character of Robert is an understandable dream role for men. He's an interesting character. I feel there's more to him than meets the eye, because sometimes he's just your average everyman who you can sympathise with, and other times he can be quite unlikable and I can't get my head around him. It must be a challenge for whoever plays him, and if it isn't a dream role, it should be. Well, it's my dream role if I were a guy. I discovered this musical through the 2006 Broadway revival soundtrack, so I still need to listen to the original Broadway cast. However, I did find a new filmed production that uses orchestrations that are very similar to the original Broadway production, which is what I'm showing you clips of now. Yes, that's Neil Patrick Harris playing Robert. Well, in a musical where an ensemble number that essentially only exists to glorify the main character, you have to get Neil Patrick Harris to play that main character. I really recommend this production and its cast, because it wasn't until I watched a full version of the musical that I realised how funny it is. Yeah, in the songs there's that dry Sondheim wit, but there's even more in the dialogue scenes that don't appear on the soundtrack. You might be surprised that this is not my favourite Sondheim musical, but it's pretty close.
World calls for me to follow.
Speaking of Neil Patrick Harris,
Laundry day, see you there, under things, tumbling. Wanna say, love your hair, here I go, mumbling.
this is a 42-minute series made for the internet, but I saw it all together as one short film, and looking at it that way, it has a better story structure, characters, humour and emotion than most full-length movies made today. Now, let me get this out the way. I don't particularly care for Joss Whedon, but this is mostly because I'm not interested in what he writes for. But I can see from the entire internet that he has a talent for writing, and boy is the writing in this musical so good. It's simple, it's funny, it gets in and gets out in the right amount of time, all while developing its small cast of characters and telling us all that we need to know. And these songs are so catchy. I know it's not usually his forte, but Joss Whedon and his brothers need to write more musicals, and I know that they're doing a sequel to Dr. Horrible in the near future, but I'm not really sure it needs a sequel. It's sort of perfect the way it is. My only problem being that some of the songs could be a tiny bit longer because they're so good and I want to listen to them more. Oh, and this is the last musical on this list involving Neil Patrick Harris, so this is the last time you'll see him. See, there he goes. No more Neil.
World calls for me to follow.
Hello, my name is Sister Clark, and I would like to share with you the most amazing musical.
Hello, my name is Elder Young. Hello, did you know that Jesus lived here in the USA? You can read all about it now. Hello, in this nifty book, it's free. No, you don't have to pay. Hello.
Okay, so I did not like this musical when I first heard the soundtrack. I don't know about Mormons, I don't really get the joke, but I enjoyed the first 3 songs because the characters and story were easy to follow. It's all happy and upbeat, and then Hasadiga Ebowai happens, and I'm reminded that Trey Parker and Matt Stone wrote this musical. But I came back to it, and I've just learned to look past that type of humour and just enjoy the story, the characters, and above all, the music. The number one reason this musical is so high on the list. These songs are the best example of where musical theatre should be going. A familiar sound harkening back to old school musicals of Broadway, mixed together with an original and fresh sound in the many different styles for each song. Now, I know this was a collaboration and Trey Parker and Matt Stone did help write these songs. but I'm giving all the credit to Robert Lopez. I adore how he can emanate the old school Broadway songs he's inspired by into these new and brilliant songs that kind of poke fun at those old school songs. These new songs make the musical fun and light-hearted and extremely entertaining, which helps because it's a comedy, but even then there's still room for emotion from these memorable characters. There is some genuine heart in some of these songs, even if it's played for laughs. This is one of two musicals, the other obviously being number one on this list, where I haven't seen it on stage and there hasn't been a filmed version of it. But I could still understand the story just by listening to the songs on the soundtrack, and that's what a good musical needs to do, tell the story primarily through songs. Yes, I had to get some plot points from the Wikipedia synopsis, but that was it. So, it's a well-made musical, the story and characters are relatable, the songs are catchy, it's a ton of fun. This is a musical that deserves its popularity and its place on Broadway.
All right, elders, that was very good indeed. Now make way for the host of the Tonys. This host will change your life.
Hello!
The world calls for me to follow.
I have to apologise for the quality of the clip coming up, because this musical has never been filmed, it's not even been put on Broadway, and so it's not well known to many people. But boy, do I wish it was. What an absolute diamond did I find lying in the rough of Spotify, to be exact. It recommended this soundtrack to me after listening to how many other musical soundtracks, so I gave it a listen one night. I was literally 4 or 5 songs in and I had already fallen in love. It does help that half the score is in my favourite key of music too. It was just such a breath of fresh air. Really great songwriting, really great performances, and a really nice, simple but heartfelt story that's being told. I suggest that before you listen to the soundtrack, you need to know an important plot point in that one character's story is told in chronological order and the other's is told in reverse chronological order. A wonderful decision made in the storytelling. Other than that, you can follow the story well enough, and it does add to the emotional effect you're meant to get at different points later in the musical. Another musical I discovered this year was Once, another tragic romance involving two quirky people with a minimal cast of musicians. I did not like that musical. Guess which one's on Broadway now? The last 5 years does everything better than Once. The characters are flawed but charming, their relationship is believable, the songs reflect the different emotions they're feeling at each point in their story, like a good musical is meant to do. My only gripe I have with the songs is that they can go on for too long. But when the songs themselves are what make up the bulk of the entire musical, what can you do? They are making a movie of this musical, starring Anna Kendrick as the female lead, which has been filmed but it hasn't gotten a release date yet. Don't you think it should be 2014? If so, then I know what movie musical I'm rooting for, other than that other movie musical starring Anna Kendrick that's going to be released at the end of that year. I'm kind of intrigued to see how they put this little production to film, but above all things, I am praying that they don't touch a note of Jason Robert Brown's music unless they really, really needed to, because I love it too damn much. I'm hoping they don't let me down. So those were my top 10 musicals that I discovered this year. Thank you for watching and keep discovering new musicals! If you like musicals.
And oh, you're suddenly a stranger. There's no explaining where you stand. And you didn't know that you're so